Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're watching this. My name is Angie. I'm a tutor student liaison here at the Catherine McCauley Center, and this is the Spanish language transfer presentation. So before we started, I wanted to give you a heads up about the homework that you'll have at the end. So just as you're watching the video, just be on the lookout for something that is new or surprising to you, and also how you can use the information in this presentation when teaching your Spanish-speaking student. So what we'll do today is talk about some basic facts about Spanish around the world, explain what language transfer is, and look at some common grammar, syntax, and phonics issues that Spanish speakers might have as they're trying to learn English, as well as come up with some ways to overcome these issues. So first, how many Spanish-speaking countries can you name? So go ahead and pause the video if you can, and just list as many as you can that you can think of. All right, so there are actually 21 Spanish-speaking countries. Some people include the US as a Spanish-speaking country. In that case, there'd be 22. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just stick with these 21. So here at the Catherine McCauley Center, we have about 100 students that speak Spanish, representing 10 of those countries. So Mexico obviously is, we have the most of. Next is Guatemala, Puerto Rico, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Cuba, Ecuador, Peru, and then one from Venezuela. So some more statistics on the Spanish language. In 2019, there were about 538 million Spanish speakers around the world. This includes native and non-native speakers. And this was interesting to me. By the number of native speakers, Spanish is the second biggest language in the world, but by total speakers, it's at number 4. And as of July 2018, there were 59.9 million people of Hispanic origin in the US. So origins of Spanish. Where did Spanish come from? Well, of course, it originated in what we now call Spain. It's also known as Castellano, and it is a mixture of Latin, so it's in the same family as French and Italian, Arabic, and this was interesting to me. Again, according to this website here, 7 or 8% of the vocabulary in Spanish comes from Arabic, and we'll talk about why in a minute. And of course, many other dialects and languages found in and near Spain. So this is a map of Spain and Portugal and the languages that are spoken. And this down here, let me get the corner. This down here is Africa. And the reason that Arabic has so much in common with Spanish is because centuries ago, the Moors from Africa had conquered this area. And then, of course, it was reconquered and reconquered until it is what it is now. So that's why the Arabic has so much influence. Also, these languages here, Catalan, Aragonese, Basque, they are, of course, not Spanish, but they have all influenced the Spanish language. So how did Spanish language come from this one country to all around the world like it is today? Well, it all started with Christopher Columbus, who was sponsored by the Spanish royals in his expeditions. And then, of course, more conquistadors and explorers traveled the world, and the Spanish language spread. They made colonies. So now it's spoken in Latin America, various islands and parts of Africa, and the US. So as you can see, this is Spain up here. And then this little dot here is Equatorial Guinea, the one Spanish-speaking country in Africa. And then, of course, South America, Central America, Mexico, and US, and these islands here. So let's talk about some of the differences between the Spanish that's spoken all around the world. Of course, these are generalizations. We know even in the US, the English that we speak varies a little bit, whether you're in Louisiana or Texas, or here in Iowa, or each of the coasts have their own kind of dialects and different slang and everything. So this is, these aren't exact or precise, but should give us a general idea of the main differences of Spanish around the world. So first is Mexican and Central American Spanish. This is obviously what we're most familiar with, being it's so close to us. And it's usually considered the easiest to understand just because they enunciate more and talk a little more slowly than some of the others. So for someone learning Spanish, this is usually considered the best place to start. So Mexico is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. And then we have Castilian Spanish, which is spoken in Spain. The main difference here is that they have an extra verb conjugation. It's also sometimes used in parts of South America, but mostly here in Spain. So you can see here we have these verb conjugations. This is I eat, you eat, he, she, or it eats, we eat, essentially y'all eat, the plural of you, and they eat. So in Spain, they have a different form of kind of an informal y'all. It's this vosotros. So I speak, you speak, he, she, or it speaks, we speak, y'all speak, and they speak. And also, some other Spanish speakers might say that Spaniards kind of sound like they have a lisp sometimes. They say their S's and Z's come out as THs. So instead of gracias, it's gracias. And this is only in front of certain letters. Of course, at the end of the word, it's still the S sound. So not all S's are the TH, but so that's another difference between Spain and the others. Next is Rio Platense Spanish. This is spoken mainly in Uruguay and Argentina. It's named after the Rio de la Plata, which is the river that's kind of the border between these two countries. It has a strong Italian influence. A century or two ago, there were a lot of Italian immigrants that came to this area. And so it really influenced their accent, and they talk with their hands a lot. I've heard a lot of native Spanish speakers kind of chuckle at the kind of Italian accent that Argentinians and Uruguayans have. And so the letter AA, the double L there, which usually makes the y sound, is changed to a sh sound. So instead of me llamo Angie, they would say me llamo Angie. And for example, ¿dónde están los llaves? Instead of ¿dónde están los llaves?, which means where are the keys? Again, they don't write it like this, but the pronunciation is changed. So Caribbean Spanish, they are infamous for their rapid talking in Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. And because of this, they'll often shorten words and drop off the ending sounds. So para becomes pa, and esta becomes ta. Andean is the Spanish that's spoken in Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and parts of Venezuela. This is really heavily influenced by the indigenous cultures around it and also the European language and cultures. It's again easier to understand than some of the others because they enunciate and speak more clearly a lot of the time. And in Colombia, they say ico instead of ito. So as you may know, they add this ito or ita to the end of the word to show something that's small or to make it more an endearing term. So Pedrito is little Pedro, and abuelito is an endearing term for grandparents, for grandpa. And then Equatorial Guinean Spanish, in that Equatorial Guinea, the Spanish, former Spanish colony in Africa. And it sounds more like European Spanish than Latin American and is influenced by the African languages. So what is language transfer? Language transfer, a basic definition is how the first language affects learning the second language, whether positively or negatively. You can also think of it as sometimes the similarities and differences between the first and second language. So recent research has suggested that when someone is learning a language, their first language actually plays a much greater role than we previously thought, and it can be really beneficial to recognize and bring in some of those and connect some of those similarities and differences to help them learn the target language. So that's why we're doing these language transfer presentations. So there are 3 types of language transfer. First is positive. So this is when something is the same or similar in the first and second language. Zero transfer, when something doesn't exist in the first language, or also you can think of it as like a clean slate. And then negative transfer, which is when there's a confliction between elements of the first language and the second language. So for example, the word heart in Spanish is corazón. And that might be an example of zero transfer, just because it's not the same, but it doesn't really conflict each other, as we'll see in the next slide with, so some grammar is, the similarities and differences in some grammar are cognates, which are words that are the same or similar in different languages. So color in Spanish is color, hospital is hospital, and elephant is elefante. There's also false cognates. So cognates would be positive transfer, obviously, and false cognates would definitely be negative transfer because they are words that sound similar but mean totally different things. So embarrassed is not actually embarazada. Embarazada means pregnant. So you don't want to confuse those two. Assist in Spanish is not asistir. Asistir means to attend. So you may hear or we've heard from a lot of our Spanish speaking students, I can't assist the class today. Obviously, they're confusing the word asistir, meaning to attend, with the very similar English word to assist, which means to help. And then sopa is not soap, it's actually soup. So kind of similar, but it sounds more like soap. Soap in Spanish is jabón. And then we have noun, adjective, word order. So we would say in English, a big house. In Spanish, they put the adjective after the noun. So they would say una casa grande, or quite literally a house big. There's also the subject, object, verb versus subject, verb, object. So yo te la envié means I sent it to you. But if these words were translated literally, it would be I, you, it, sent. So the order there is different. And the present progressive versus simple present. In Spanish, the progressive tenses exist, but they're not used nearly as often as we use them in English. In English, we use them for everything. I'm going to the store. I'm coming to your house. But in Spanish, they would just say, I go to the store, or I come to your house. So it's not used as often as it is in English. And then the infamous prepositions. So we have in, at, and on. And in Spanish, generally, they just use this one, in, for all of those, with a few exceptions, of course. But so these might be very confusing to the students. So we did make a video for our students. They can find it on the YouTube page if you would like to direct them to that if they have troubles. That's just kind of a quick explanation of when we use in, at, and on for time and location. So implication for teaching is mainly just practice. Practice makes perfect. And especially these helping verbs can be very confusing to the students because in Spanish, they would just say, for example, she no go to the store. They don't have these did and didn'ts and do's and do, and all that can be very confusing to them. Also, these other helping verbs, to have and to be, they might just need a little extra practice with that. So for phonics, in Spanish, the vowel sounds, unless they're combined, Spanish combines the different vowel sounds, they make the same sound every time. So A always sounds like A, I always sounds like E, E always sounds like A, O, U, U. In English, we have many different sounds that these same letters can make, which can be very confusing. And actually, a lot of times, Spanish-speaking students won't even be able to hear the difference between things like hot and hat and beat and bit. They can't really hear those differences because they have no context, because in Spanish, they just make the same sounds unless they're combined with another vowel. So And of course, if they can't hear the difference, they can't say the words right. And it was funny because the last time I did this presentation at the Tutor conference, a couple days later, I was tutoring a Spanish-speaking lady, and the word in the book was hot. Like, oh, it's so hot out today. And she kind of looked at me. She's like, hot? Like what you put on your head? And so I was surprised that yeah, she really couldn't hear the difference between those words, hot and hat. So the sounds of the letters sometimes are different. Of course, we have the J in Spanish makes the what we would call an H sound. So for haha, it wouldn't be H-A-H-A, it would be J-A-J-A. H is always silent, of course, and the G sometimes makes that H sound as well. And then the TH. The TH sound doesn't really exist in Spanish, so this can be very difficult for them to pronounce. One tip I learned from one of my coworkers actually is to teach them how to pronounce this sound. It might be helpful to have them stick their tongue all the way out and then try to say the word. So again, implications for teaching. Don't get caught up on pronunciation unless the accent is making it hard to communicate. We all know English language learners, they're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's okay, that's good. And so we can't correct every mistake right away. It's just, it doesn't help them, it doesn't help us. So unless their pronunciation is so off that they're saying a different word or that you really don't understand what they're trying to say, you know, just don't get caught on that. So another issue that Spanish speakers might have is double negatives. In Spanish, they use double negatives a lot. If the sentence is negative, everything in the sentence is negative. Unlike in English, we wouldn't say, I know see nobody, or I don't see nobody. We would say, I don't see anybody. So when one thing is negative, we change the other thing to positive. So this is something that Spanish speakers might get wrong quite a bit. Another one is they went for to see the movie. Spanish speakers might do this a lot, the for to, because in Spanish we would say para ver, which would be literally translated to for to see. So maybe just reminding them that you don't use for and to together in this way. And then the articles, they might have trouble with, you know, knowing when to say one or the or because it's, they just say it a little, they use the articles a little differently in Spanish. So they might say, I have one book instead of I have a book. So again, some more implications for teaching is just practice, practice, practice. Also, there's nothing wrong with explaining to them, like in Spanish, you do use the double negative, but in English, if one thing is negative, everything else has to be positive. So just kind of making that connection can be helpful as well. So for your homework, you can email education@cmc-cr.org with your answers to these 3 questions. Number 1, was there anything in this training that was shocking or surprising to you? Number 2, Do you know of any other differences or similarities between English and Spanish that might affect your students' learning in some way? And number 3, what new insights or strategies will you bring into your teaching based on this training? So thank you so much for watching. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.